Runecraft is a sacred power, said to have existed since the dawn of humankind. Those chosen and born with the power defied order with their supernatural might and ended up reigning as leaders of all things. Under their rule, the ancient people praised runecraft as a miracle bestowed by gods. However, among the countless runes, there was one reviled and hated as a curse. It is the Asura rune. The young man carrying this rune on his scarred back ran, chased by his own people. Armed with torches and pitchforks, they decide to let him go, with the warning to never return to their village ever again. Stumbling in the icy mountain, Van kept running for his life. From ancient times, those born with his rune bring ruin without fail. A group of people from another village sees his beaten body, barely clinging to life as he struggles to breathe. The little family uses runecraft to save his life, despite seeing the mark on his back. With this, his eyes closed. 7 years later, the village rang with screaming as people insisted on knowing nothing. Odd men were looking for an Asura bearer, but have failed to find anyone after combing through. They're eventually driven out by loud locals and report to their boss that there's no one in the entire region that fits their target. A creepy hand reaches out and one man is called to come closer. The boss drives his hand through the thug's stomach, and his partner screams in shock and horror. There's no way people like them without mana or runecraft could find their target, but he's different and can smell the reek of ruin nearby. Van and Linda are called over, told that the people looking for them are gone. Relieved, the family stretches and breathes fresh air again. The young man apologizes as weird people keep coming for him, but no one there cares for that. Partel wipes the dust off their faces, and they note that Van always hides in the same place near the tree. It's his favorite spot. After all, it's where they saved him on that day, 7 years ago. In the whole village, this place brings him the most comfort. The father laughs at his words, finding his sincerity precious and adorable. The couple's wedding preparations are all done, and they can start as soon as the sun sets. It was a wonderful day, and nobody could wait for the event later. Night falls and the only light in the forest was in the village. Citizens gathered around a huge bonfire for the wedding. Van and Linda looked at each other with love in their eyes and are told to say a few words as they're pronounced husband and wife. The people cheer as the wife promises to make him so happy that he forgets how to cry. Meanwhile, the Asura bearer sheepishly apologizes for putting everyone in a tough spot again. Throughout his life, screams of despair followed wherever he went, like shackles on his feet. He had nowhere to go, and if they hadn't taken him in 7 years ago, he wouldn't have lasted another day in the world. He goes on about being unsure if it really is okay for someone like him to be there. However, he's forced to stop as Linda plants a hard punch across his face, telling her husband to stop it. If they were scared of all that, then they wouldn't have saved him in the first place. When she met him for the first time, it'd be a lie to say that she wasn't worried, but the village met a real crisis shortly after, and everyone nearly died, including her. He protected all of them and risked his life in the process, so they decided that they were past worrying about his mark. Even if another crisis comes, they'll get through it together, just like they did that day. The others echo her words, promising to protect the soft-hearted boy like he protected them. With this, they move on and get ready to finish the wedding ceremony. Expressing their love for each other, the newlyweds share a precious kiss. The boss from before, Kesor, feigns emotion and says he's getting all teary-eyed from watching them. Bright light from the bonfire illuminated the forest, but the warm glow was replaced with a harsh and green blast. Van's breathing was ragged, and he opened his eyes to see his arms covered in wounds. Opening them a bit more, he starts to see the corpses on the ground. Tragedy had struck, just like always. Broken and wounded bodies, all of which were lifeless, were scattered throughout the wedding grounds. What was supposed to be a joyous party became the burial ground for the entire village. Van fell back and screamed in horror, unable to believe what was happening and questioning why it was like that. He was the only one left alive, and he could clearly see the mangled bodies of his uncle Partel and Aunt Kara. As despair started setting in, Kesor appeared behind him, mockingly calling to the young man. He smacks the lone survivor around, causing him to tumble and crash into a tree. Dragging Linda by her hair, he sings a tune, uncannily similar to one for hide and seek. If their Asura rune was all hidden, then he was going to look for them. Van questions who he is and what his intentions are, but all he needs to know is that the runecaster has business with him. There's someone who needs the true rune in the Asura he was born with. Since survivors are a pain, he wiped out every nearby village without exception. He's just doing what he's told as a mercenary, so there should be no hard feeling. Telling the young man not to hate him too much, Kesser imprisons him in a pocket dimension prepared by his employer, where time flows differently. He'll be let out when the time comes, so he just has to be good and wait for that to happen. although even he doesn't know when that'll be. The last thing Van sees before slipping away is Linda, still propped up by her hair. Staring at him, her mouth moves with a final message, and she leaves him with one last smile. The husband reached out, desperately and in tears, but couldn't fight the dimension that devoured his body. Wrapped in the tool, he finds himself in a completely different place, all alone after his people were killed. Kezar spoke of the true power of ruin. Van believed that everything was because of a single rune, but there was never a way out. In the end, his very existence only ever brought death and tragedy to those around him. From the moment he was born, there was no way to escape the doomed fate. If he had just accepted that a little bit earlier, then maybe those he loved would have lived. Just this once, he thought things might be different, and that foolishness is why they died. His vain and greedy wish to live a normal life is what killed everyone. Ridden with guilt and surrounded by his own demons, he apologizes and repents. Eventually, he stops and tells them not to forgive him, as he doesn't deserve mercy. Again, left alone, he wonders why God would inflict such a cruel fate on him. Gods were of no use to him now, and he was absolutely exhausted from it all. With no energy or will to live, he asks to be released with death, hopefully in peace. He remembers Linda's last words, saying it isn't his fault and that she'll love him forever. Van's eyes shot open and he forced himself to stand back up. Again ridden with guilt, his exhaustion is replaced with something stronger. He blames himself for everything that happened. It was all his fault, and yet he dared and audaciously wished for a peaceful death. To him, he has no right to end things that way, especially after causing so much pain to so many people. There was still something he had to do. Screams rang out from his lungs as intense emotions poured out. Thoughts and the desire for revenge overflowed. The Asura rune is said to invariably bring ruin, but he doesn't care about any of that anymore, as there was nothing worse than what he was going through. Kezar said something about someone needing the ruin he carries. As such, he'll deliver it to their door and make them feel it himself. In that moment, Van vows to show his transgressors what they're looking for. He thinks about the village and its people, and asks for a little bit more time. He'll join them later on, as dying can wait until after he completes his revenge. To do that, he has to break out of the pocket dimension and eliminate the souls chasing after him. They ran in to kill him, blaming the young man for all their agony. He faces them head-on, prepared to spend thousands of years to achieve his vengeance. Like a demon, he swears his life on it and begins his arduous journey. 200 years pass, and he's already vanquished countless souls. Then another 200 pass. Soon, he's already spent 600 years in the dimension, grinding his enemies to dust. For centuries, the boy who would walk the Asura's path danced within ruin, yet he still did not know the true hidden power of his rune. Facing a huge enemy, he screamed like a demonic beast nearing his goal. He spent 999 years making himself stronger and bathing in his guilt. Drenched in the remains of his enemies and left in the depths of despair, endless agony befell him, but he leapt towards his enemies without ever losing the fire of vengeance in his heart. In the 1000th year, he spent most of his time being pummeled by his strongest adversary yet. Regardless of how hard he tried, he could never beat it, and when death came close, he remembers the day Linda talked about her dreams. First was to marry him, and have her parents become his in-laws. Then, not too much or too little, she hoped for a son and daughter. Lastly, she wanted a home where they can always come back smiling, protected by a family fence to keep each other safe. Her smile was as warm and brilliant as her dream. Remembering his wife, the true power of ruin was unleashed from within the young man. Van screamed as the power started overflowing from his body, seeping out and taking over his entire being. The lives lost due to his tragedy followed him, even in this power, and he exploded with newfound strength. In that moment, he realized the true power of Asura. The god of ruin used a power to summon Helms. Feeling like a god himself, he's sure that if this power had awakened on that tragic day, then none of his loved ones would have died. Facing the enormous enemy once more, he now smiled. He dashed in and unleashed a heavy punch, which was strong enough to send the heavy and colossal target flying back. It was unlike anything he's ever felt, and the tables have completely turned. The demonic god jumped up to rise above his enemy. In the sky, he manifests his first armament. The Annihilation Fist is a gauntlet, imbued with the power to destroy at a particle level. Van dives down and strikes his target's skull, driving his fist deeper by the second, and causing the dimension's ground to shake with the impact of his attack. In the real world outside, a bunch of thugs attacked a couple, killing the man and demanding money. Just then, Van appeared behind the leader, freed and with something to ask. Interrupting them, he flatly asks what year it was. Unaware of who he was dealing with, the man makes fun of him and says it's the year 1500. The runecaster thinks about it on his own, not minding the man behind him. The thugs share a look and swing, but their weapon breaks while he's computing the time that passed. They're shocked as he didn't even fight back. Terror suddenly seeped into their hearts as Van turned to look at them like insignificant insects. He strikes them down in an instant and, before they could even register what happened, tears everyone apart with his bare fists. The thugs are killed, with just one left alive on purpose. The man nearly wets himself as the demonic being turned to him, smiling and saying he has a question to ask again. In the continent of ActionToon, countless kingdoms have been founded since ancient times, mainly with the power of runecraft. Among them is one that is praised as the greatest kingdom in history. Its name is the Zoe Kingdom. It has dominated the continent as a hegemony for many years, relying on its military strength. Based on Van's drawing of Kesser, the thug says his robes belong to the royal family's sorcerers. Beaten up, he smiles and says there's no way he'd possibly lie to him. The man was hung upside down and asked for more details. 5 years ago, the mercenary met with their boss, Yahello, with a request from an important man. They just had to find someone and clear a few villages, in exchange for lots of money. Contact was never made with the actual employer, but they had no reason to refuse. Since they were dirty bandits, they cleared entire villages without a trace. It was difficult to burn so many corpses, so they had to work extremely hard during the time. After finishing the job, they were paid handsomely, and the mercenary left without any problems. He even confirms that there was an orange-haired girl among the corpses. She was likely burned along with the rest, which is a shame as her beauty would have fetched a high price as a slave. The memory of his poor family appeared in Van's mind, and he had to punish the thug that spoke of his wife so lightly. Later on, the two arrive at the bandits' mountain hideout. They were collecting slaves like it was a normal day, threatening and abusing them. There were even a bunch of imprisoned kids, all of which they intended to sell. Just then, the guards at the gate turned from quick knocks. He sees the head of his comrade, and asks what took him so long. The severed head falls as Van lunges in to punch the guard. With the first one down, he breaks through the gate and blocks the second guard's attack. They have no idea who he is and where he came from, but the intruder moved on the battlefield like a veteran. Ducking deep and gripping his fist tight, he tells the thug to shut up. One punch is enough to eliminate someone as weak as him, but the commotion draws the attention of the other bandits there. Van approaches the insignificant pests, dragging the corpses of their comrades in his hands. Tossing them over, he demands to speak to their leader, again saying that he has something to ask. Missing the message, they let their pride take over and get ready for a fight. However, a stern voice tells them all to step back. They insist on handling it, but Yahello moves forward, asking if they all intend to die. The enemy is a sorcerer born with runecraft, just like him. Skipping the pretense, the leader of the bandits questions what the intruder wants. Van mentions the job from 5 years ago, and how they took orders from Kesser. The leader is surprised that he's already found out that much from his men. If they tell him where the mercenary is, then he promises to spare them all. The leader decides to give him the information he wants, but covers his arm with blades and punches the man, saying he'll only tell it to the corpse that's left of him. The strike hits directly and the impact sends the target flying away. If he wants to lie about sparing them, then he should at least hide the killing intent in his mana. Yahello decides to end him today, using his blade rune that arms his entire body with sharp and hard blades. Despite taking the hit, Van just confirms that it won't be easy to solve things through conversation. However, it was his turn to strike, so he let his energy flow. The leader was just standing there, waiting for the next move, but his opponent appeared before him so fast that he couldn't even react. A punch is driven deep into his gut, and it's as if his insides are crushed through the blades of his body. Van unleashes a barrage of hits, wondering how someone so weak could be a leader. Insulted, Yahello grit his teeth and raised his empowered arm to fight back. He swings down for the kill, but the wide hit is easily dodged by the target. Annoyed by the rat-like movement, he clads his entire body in blades and challenges his enemy to dodge his next move. Spinning like a whirlwind to shoot the blades, he provokes the seemingly young rune caster. Continuing to launch sharp shards, he asks what it feels to have one's body torn apart. One normally wouldn't be able to take a single step, but Van kept moving forward, unfazed by the countless projectiles that were cutting his body. Like the demon god he was, he walked without feeling an ounce of pain. It was laughable that such an itch would even be considered pain in this world. Mistaking it for foolish passion, Yahello stopped spinning and got ready for another attack. His entire arm is covered in blades like before, but was now the size of a giant's. Monstrous in his own right, the bandit leader smiled and swung with the might that put their gang at the top. At best, Van's skin is peeled off alive, so he only needs to cut his nerves off. To him, they were all far too shallow. This level of pain is nothing compared to the swamp of agony he fell to and conquered for a millennium. Meeting Yul's fist with his own, he blows the shallow hit away. Their clash sends shockwaves throughout the base, and the leader stares in shock one last time before the top half of his body is blown apart from the other and is sent flying across the sky and out of the atmosphere. With the base destroyed and the battle over, Van menacingly turns to the rest of the members and suggests picking up where they left off. Each and every one gulped in terror, but had no choice but to fight for their lives. By the time the sun was about to set, countless corpses were piled up. One man was left alive and reveals that Kesor is currently in the Nordia kingdom. Having shared the information, he asks if he'll be spared as promised earlier. Van acts like he doesn't remember and says it's a joke while laughing. As the man was about to leave, a sharp hand broke through his head. The only joke was him sparing any of their lives. To leave any of their disgusting selves alive was ridiculous. If he had his way, he'd invade Zoe right now, but he can't just blindly believe a bandit's words. Even if it takes some time, he will meet Kesor and confirm things himself. He calls to Linda and her family and asks for a bit more time. In return, he's prepared a little present to offer. He lacks the artistic sense, but requests that they be satisfied with it for now. Before him, the corpses of the bandits that raided their village were sculpted into a cross. Their revenge is just starting, and to signal this new beginning, he burns the cross and moves toward Nordia next. In the Nordia Kingdom's Guild Street, one man receives a bone-breaking punch to his face. He falls to his knees in the dark alley, with no one to hear his screams. Barely clinging to life, he says the name Anna Dalton. Around them were other dead bodies, which is why Van told them to talk from the beginning. Thanking him for the info, he exits the alley that was filled with beaten men. For the next step, he has to find out where the woman is, and can't afford any delays. After all, something like yesterday might happen again. The day before, he was screaming in the middle of the forest, struggling to control the magic power that was running wild and overflowing from his body. Magic power is an unknown particle that cannot be seen, but is spread throughout the universe. A person who naturally accumulates this and uses runecraft is called a runecaster or sorcerer, who uses their body as a vessel to hold the power. If the mana runs wild within the body, it might just explode from being overloaded. Van has to stop the rampage by sealing his power immediately. Fortunately, he's skilled enough to do this. After one last burst, the mana stops running wild, and he panted in overexertion. He almost died there, but since he sealed most of his magic, he can only use a very small amount now. Continuing to abuse his power won't end with just his hair burning, so he needs to find the root cause of it all. Until then, he has no choice but to get by with what little he left unsealed. He finds a large man blocking his path, and asks that he move out of the way as he has to get past. The man named Jenny says Anna is using the place, so no one is permitted to enter. Van says he should have told him this earlier. After all, it seems he's unexpectedly arrived at the right place. Unwilling to waste time, he knocks the lackey out with a heavy punch, and tells him to get some sleep for a while. He enters what seems to be a public bath, but is only occupied by a few people. Anna, who's in the middle of her bath, complains about being interrupted despite booking the place. Van gets right to it and says he's looking for someone named Kesor. She's surprised that he's slinging the name around so lightly, as if asking for death. Her reaction confirms that he's found the right person, and tells her to share everything she knows. Laughing at his brazenness, she tells her lackeys to rip his mouth off and bring it to her. She's known as the top information broker of the kingdom's black market. Following her orders, the men guarding her are filled with power, and start changing their forms into something more feral and beastly. They turn into wolf-like creatures with multiple eyes on their heads, and pounce on the man who dared to belittle their master. As always, Van wanted to resolve things with communication, but the people around him are just so keen on making it hard. He punches a couple of the enemies apart and sends them flying. As soon as he stops, one tries to retaliate by aiming for a blind spot, but there are no blind spots with the Asura bearer. He counters and gains some distance as another leapt in to strike. The incessant barrage starts to annoy him, so gets ready and aims right at his target. Before they could even react, he launches himself at the beasts and closes the gap in an instant. His fist makes contact with one enemy, but the sheer blast from his punch bores a hole through the other's body. Even the wall of the bath is torn apart, just missing Anna by a few meters. With all that settled, he asks if she's finally ready to have a peaceful conversation. Amused by the sorcerer, she regrettably says that Kesor isn't in the area anymore. She's asked where he is now, but she's an information broker who can't give any information unless paid. To her surprise, he sensibly asks for her rates instead of forcing it out. Van clarifies that he just killed her guards in self-defense, and is more than willing to pay a fair price. For information about Kesor, including his movements, she charges him 10,000 gold coins. It's an extremely high amount for him, but due to his mistaken expectations of the price, she unfortunately can't give him any information. Since he just has to pay, he turns to leave and tells her to wait patiently. The broker asks why he's looking for the mercenary, with such a terrifying gaze, no less. She carelessly asks if he killed his family, but is told to mind her own business unless she wants her mouth torn apart. Despite the chilling warning, she smiles and feigns fear. Van makes his way to the kingdom's mercenary street and completes his registration as a mercenary. The work itself is quick, but rookies usually take time as veterans take priority for assignments. It seems it's going to take longer than expected, but he needed a way to make money anyway. He considered threatening the broker if necessary, but she was obviously no ordinary person, and there's no point in making unnecessary enemies. As he tries to make an honest living, a hooded figure files a job request for someone with no experience. His eyes dart to her, and the receptionist gestures to him as the perfect candidate as well. Skipping the names, he introduces himself as the rookie who just registered. Taking her hood off, she says her request is simple, and says he just has to take responsibility for one night. Leona, request catches the two men off guard, so Van turns away from the crazy woman, while the staff suggests she go to a brothel. Realizing the misunderstanding, she clarifies that she's just looking for an escort. She suggests listening to the payment before leaving, but he hates crazy employers. A large man who overhears asks how much, and is told that she's offering 10,000 gold. This makes the Asura bearer stop. The man tries to take the job, but she can't hire a veteran with a well-known face. He insists because of the payment and starts to take her arm by force. Voices are raised as he starts to get annoyed, but the trashy mercenary is told to keep his hands off by Van. After all, he can't be grabbing his precious employer's body like that. Screams and desperate cries for mercy rang throughout the forest. Amid the burning village, a man begs for his son to be spared, but to no avail. Merkel, the leader of the men, asks about their previous job of snatching the Leon family's daughter. They're told to pick 3 of their best people and be on standby. Lastly, they're told to hang a corpse he played with and head out right after. As the lackey starts to confirm his orders, his body suddenly begins floating, and he asks if he did something wrong. It's not that. Hanging one victim alone isn't enough to satisfy Merkel, but it'll be perfect if he dissects and hangs him next to the first. Again, screams rang throughout the dark forest. Meanwhile, Van took scrumptious bites of his food, leaving Leona visibly disturbed. After listening to his chewing, she bangs her fist on the table in frustration. They are now in a pub, and he asks if the food does not suit her taste. Complaining about it all, she scolds him for using the mercenary earlier as a chair as well. Not intending to sit on him either, she tells him to let the man go. They had to stop him from beating the veteran to death earlier, but this confirmed his skill to Leona. Again, she tells him to stop treating people like objects, so they move on the job details, including how far he has to escort her. She needs to reach the border of the Yuhiana kingdom, and can actually get there in a day. Given the high reward, he's already suspicious of this being tied to something dangerous. She might even be a scion of some powerful house, or perhaps a fugitive. Obviously caught, she feigns ignorance and says she's just somewhat wealthy. However, he continues to pressure her, certain there's something more. He immediately disappears from her side as she threatens to hire someone else. Back in his seat, Van says he'd never suspect his precious employer. Since departing sooner is better for her, he suggests going right now. After all, he wouldn't want to waste her valuable time waiting. They come to an agreement and reach the mountains in no time. Moving forward together, they quickly halfway to their destination. It's been peaceful so far, so she wonders if she should have hired an escort in the first place. He suddenly tells her to stop, sure that he feels Mana nearby. Based on the footsteps, the strangers were headed to them fast. There were 4 men sprinting, and one of them was particularly troublesome. Sensing him, Merkel says peeking is a bad habit, and shoots a death ray at the sorcerer. He reacts fast and jumps away, bringing Leona with him. Having arrived on the scene, the lackeys are told to capture the target alive. Looking at the remnants of the blast, Van says it was probably just a warning, and the real one was coming. He turns his head in an instant and sees 3 enemies, pouncing at them with their blades drawn. The first 2 are blocked without worries, but a third makes his way just inches from his employer. Remembering his job, he deflects their weapons and kicks the man who reached her blind spot. One hit is enough to knock him out cold. Meanwhile, the 2 try to attack once again, but miss as their escort jumps away with their target. Putting a considerable distance between them, Van turns to Leona with an order. From that moment on, under no circumstances was she allowed to step away from his back. With her confirmation, he asks the bandits who they are. Offering him no proper answer, they just instruct him to leave her behind if he wants to leave. He tells them to leave 10,000 gold in return, so they obviously fail to come to an agreement. The two groups clash, with blade and fist exchanging countless blows in an instant. Van perfectly matches the two despite the numbers advantage, but the assailants refuse to back down so easily. They were worried he might be a sorcerer, but mistakenly think that he's just a brat. Actually, he was just being careful, but it seems that was needless for people as stupid as they are. He closes the gap in an instant, and unleashes a flurry of attacks before they could even react to his movements. One last punch blasts through their bodies, raising the trees and reaching the mountains behind. All that's left are the feet planted on the ground where they stood. As expected, they're mere clowns to someone like him. Meanwhile, Leona couldn't understand how he did that, when he looks just even younger than her. If her father saw him, he'd probably be shocked and thrilled at the same time. Merkel speaks, saying rune casters often gauge each other's mana, as the amount matches one's skill. Van is surprised that he's showing himself, having thought that he already escaped. The sorcerer was curious how a child could bear mana on par with his own. The mad anatomist is curious to see the splendid organs he must be hiding. He promises to dissect him without pain if he surrenders the girl. Thoroughly rejected, Merkel launches another death beam. This time, Van calls to Leona and confirms that she was lying about being an ordinary merchant's daughter. Her face is filled with fear as she tries to explain, but he tells her to save her excuses and grabs her by the clothes on her back. Unwilling to listen, she places her right between him and the death beam. She screams in terror and curses him as she cried. Meanwhile, Merkel realizes that he was about to kill his target. Van's expression was completely serious, so he moved his arm to change the trajectory of his attack. Leona is placed back on the ground, and she shakes in fear while staring at the ground. The ray shifted its trajectory just as it was about to hit her. Enraged, she and the sorcerer, after her scream at Van, saying she almost died. He's supposed to be her bodyguard, but he almost caused her death himself. To twist the direction in that fleeting instant, Merkel proved his skill in manipulating mana. What's more, his actions confirm that his goal is to capture his employer, not kill her. Ignoring her complaints, he says he'll overlook her lie just this time. She's told that he's going to throw her, and that she's supposed to land on her own and hide safely. Assuring her that she's not going to die, he grips her neck and throws her into oblivion. Merkel won't let his target escape so easily, so he jumps to chase after her. However, Van has no intention of letting him do as he pleases, and grabs the sorcerer by his ankle. Pulling him back, he uses the momentum and punches the enemy right in his face. The barrage was just starting, and several other strikes were driven into his body. He lands all his shots, but Merkel surprisingly stands his ground and laughs. It felt as though all the hits were blocked by something hard. Humoring him, the enemy says he'll catch the girl after carving him up. The rune craft in his possession is psychokinesis, which manipulates an object's physical state using mana. With it comes the ability to discharge power in an instant burst, just like the rays he's been using. He launches one preemptively, and while Van dodges this, he follows through with a physical attack on the distracted target. Clad in psychokinetic enhancements, his hand-to-hand combat is considerably strong. It's the Asura holder's turn to stand his ground and counter with hits of his own. Dodging once more, he pulls his fist back and uses a lot of power to unleash a strike. Just like earlier, the rune creates an energy shield that blocks his attacks. It's an annoying rune indeed. Merkel says it's useless, as their rune quality is worlds apart, even if their mana amount is similar. However, since he's so skilled, the gang leader offers him employment, along with a hefty pay. Van shares how much Leona is paying him, but the meager amount makes the leader laugh, as they can make that much just by hitting 2 villages. However, the revelation of his deeds irks the Asura bearer. Merkel proudly says that they do anything with no questions asked, as long as they're paid. Seeing Van smiles, he laughs in delight, thinking the enemy was about to turn into a valuable ally. However, the sorcerer was actually laughing at how pathetic he is for even talking to him. It's ridiculous that he was having a conversation with vermin like him. Now knowing better, he's decided to tear him limb from limb, until he's unrecognizable. The insolent refusal to his generous offer angers Merkel, but his reaction is cut short as Van unleashes a flurry of hits. As usual, it seems as though there's no chance of him breaking through the enemy's domain, but that doesn't stop him from continuing his barrage. Countless strikes are launched at the barrier, and although it stops them completely at first, the damage soon accumulates. After a while, small cracks turn big, and big cracks start to chip away. Finally, the energy shield shattered completely, leaving the caster completely shocked by the unthinkable feat. As he questioned how it was even possible, Van targeted his arm and tore it apart. Screams rang out, but again, he's interrupted by another punch, this time to the chest. The sorcerer is sent flying without the barrier protecting him. Merkel was furious and no longer interested in his organs. As the price for scorning his mercy, he gathers his power and shoots an extremely powerful beam, telling him to be reduced to dust. With this, an enormous blast tears through the thick forest. However, despite how it's strong enough to level entire villages, Van stood his ground to take it all. Merkel questioned how it was possible, certain that their mana levels are at the same level. There should be no way for him to withstand his psychokinesis. Repeating his words, Van calls the arrogant sorcerer a fool, and releases just enough of Asura's mana to show the huge gap between them. Merkel trembled, unable to comprehend the immense mana that was being thrown at him. Sick of it, the Bearer of Ruin charged in, ready to send his enemy to the depths of hell. Using his first armament, Van lets his empowered fists rain on the target, cutting him down bit by bit until he drives the Annihilation Fist deep into the enemy's gut. He tears through his body. Without even allowing him to fall first, he wraps his arms in bandages, signaling the end of the battle. As he walked away, the area behind belatedly broke down from the impact, and Merkel's body was eradicated at a particle level. Done with this matter, it was time for Van to fetch his dear employer. From the power to arm the entire body with blades, transcend time and space, or tear through land and cut through mountains. Runecrafts are supernatural forces that defy the divine order of the universe and surpass the laws of physics. Among all these, Asura's rune is labeled as the worst in history, and due to the actions of the boy who wields this, a new history is starting to be written on the continent of Atun. Walking in the direction he threw, Van finds his employer safe and sound. Leona was still indignant, and scolds him for throwing her far away all of a sudden. However, she shuts her mouth as he drives his fist into the tree behind her and says she hasn't been the most honest person during their time together. Given her hesitance, he lets it go and asks for his payment. As he's delivered her to the destination, he receives a bag of gold coins and starts to walk away, but she calls out to say something. Again, she doesn't say anything, so he starts leaving. She'd love to take him to her family, but she can't drag such a young mercenary into the war. It can't be helped, regardless of how much of a shame he is to let go. For now, she has to return to her family. In Nordia, Van arrives in one of Anna's houses. Seeing him toss a bag of gold coins over, she praises his efficiency and quick work. He's itching for the information, but to his confusion, the broker says she'll only take half the amount. Annoyance starts seeping in, but she admits that she failed to track Kezar down, as he's a thorough person. However, she can tell him about him and anyone that might know where he is. With his acceptance, she brings up the mercenary group named Teze. It's an organization filled with shady figures, and involved in the shadiest crimes. Standing at the top is their leader, Kezar. They got famous 5 years ago, and are now influential enough to dominate a small kingdom. It's currently hard to even find their main base, more so with their leader's exact whereabouts. Fortunately, she's the kingdom's best information broker, and has located one of Tez's executives. Anna shows a poster of Haxa, characterized by a long scar on his face. He's a brutal assassin born with the concealing rune, and has never failed in assassination. If he's part of the group's executives, then he might know where the leader is. According to the intel she's gathered, he's in Valhilda City, the capital of the Bugger Kingdom. In there was also Merkel's gang base. However, it was filled with members' corpses and the stench of carnage. The killings weren't done yet, and the remaining survivors did their best to run for their lives. However, they lose their heads without even knowing the cause of the attack. Standing there was Haxa, saying he's just doing as he was told. Perhaps they're being punished for failing in the mission personally entrusted by Kezar. A man complains that they weren't told about the monster protecting Leona. They even lost their chief as a result. The sorcerer apologizes, saying they didn't expect Merkel to be defeated by a rookie mercenary either. Their entire gang was being wiped out just because of one failed mission. Haxa suggests that they just view it as punishment, since they're all low-level killers anyway. Enraged, the man curses him and signals for the other survivors. In that instant, a group of mercenaries charged in to surround the intruder. Using the touch rune, which creates a huge and controllable hand of mana, the old man renders Haxa incapacitated. With this, he was defenseless and free to be killed by the others. However, he just apologizes in advance. The rune's power was gripping him tight for sure, but he suddenly disappeared from its grasp, and the gang members were left with no target to go far. Suddenly, the concealment rune user appears behind the old man. It was over before he could even realize what just happened, and he could only curse helplessly as he was cut apart in an instant. With the night calming down once more, a man outside asks Haxa if he's taken care of everything. The assassin barely spares him a glance and tells him to check personally if it isn't already obvious. Since he's sure that there won't be any problems anyway, the cloaked man shares that Merkel's killer is being investigated and gives a few descriptions. Catching on fast, Haxa confirms that the mercenary is going to be his next target. His sharp mind is why Kessler won't let him go. With this, the messenger disappears to report the success of the night's job. Left alone, the assassin lights a cigarette and basks in the moonlight, thinking about his target's characteristics. On the other hand, Van was hearing about Haxa for the first time. His location was nearby, and now he just needs the name of the person he's going for next. Taze's executive sighs as the number of people on his kill list increases by the day. Ofan asks Magat if there's any way to get out of their situation. Before them was a colossal monster, one that could devour villages in mere moments. The beast glared at them with blank but terrifying eyes. Without any idea how to escape, the two children start to panic, more so when the creature roars and lunges at them, opening the maw in its body. Death was inescapable and all they could do was wait for it to come. Just then, something shot up from the ground, destroying the soil under. Clenching his fist high up in the sky, Van aims and launches his annihilation fist right through the monster's body. The light in its eyes disappear, stomped dead by the attack. Its innards fall onto the children below, and the rest of its body soon follows and crashes to the ground. The hole that blasted through its chest was strong enough to sever its top and lower half. Van, now back on the ground and wearing his cloak, confirms that the kids are okay. Since the area is crawling with monsters, he suggests that they leave right away. They ask how they could ever repay him, but he says they don't need to worry about it. Refusing to let it go, they offer to treat him to a meal, sharing that their shop was nearby. He declines again, adding that he's also looking for a shop in the area. Ofan asks for the name, proudly saying that they know all the stores in the area. As soon as he says that he's headed to a tavern called the Blue Knight, the two perk up as he surprisingly seems to be looking for their shop. The girl is a cook at the tavern, and the smaller boy with her is her little brother. They look at him with bright eyes and ask for his name, but his gaze is much deeper and darker. Not minding, the children tell him to let them lead the way. Soon enough, they arrive at the Blue Knight on the outskirts of the kingdom. A boy named Haru was waiting for them by the entrance, and asked what took so long. Ofan shares that they ran into a monster on the way, earning a huge reaction from their worried friends. She adds how they were saved by a kind person, and turns her head to call to Van. The ominous energy seeped out of the odd man, but she introduced him with a bright tone. Since he came all the way there in search of their shop, they showed him in. The tavern looked well kept inside, and he asks if the kids are running the place all by themselves. They're actually just living there, although Ofan works as a cook most of the time. As he probably noticed, they aren't a real family, and all came from different kingdoms. Their stories are familiar, with Lily and Ain losing their parents in the war, Haru's village being destroyed by monsters, and Magat being orphaned because of evil mercenaries. They should have died a long time ago, but a man brought them there and took them under his wing. The mention of a man alerts Van. He's the actual owner of the shop, and their first savior. Since he's still probably asleep, Ofan decides to wake him up, and asks their guest to have a meal for now. The little girl stomps up the stairs, ready to scold the owner for sleeping in. As expected, she enters his room and sees him dozing off, even asking for a few more minutes when woken up. With a serious tone, she shares that she and Magat were almost killed by a monster. This works and prompts the man to jolt up, worriedly asking if they're hurt in any way. Fortunately, they were saved by someone who was on the way to their shop. With that said, the familiar priest gets up to greet the person who saved his children. Walking down the stairs, he's led to the hooded man sitting in the middle of the tavern. He thanks him sincerely for keeping the children safe. Van insists that it was just a stroke of luck, but still, this was ending up to be quite an interesting turn of events. After all, the man looked very much like the person he's looking for. Haxa returned his demonic gaze with a cold and chilling stare. Having acknowledged each other, he takes a seat, saying he's just an ordinary inn owner. The guest makes the first move, saying the chef there is known to be a fantastic cook. It must truly be an unexpected source, but since he's already been tempted, he'd like to see their cooking skills for himself. Haxa says the children get rowdy when he's in the kitchen, and would end up being a distraction. If that is his concern, Van suggests having a meal tomorrow, before the sun rises. Since the kids will be asleep then, the tavern owner accepts the request. Establishing a discreet agreement, the two decide to head to bed early. Told to show the guest to his room, often is surprised that they got close so fast. It's nothing too unnatural. After all, they're just cut from the same cloth and understand each other instinctively. Night soon falls, and Van is escorted into a warm and cozy room. Before the girl leaves, the guest calls without turning to face her. With a tired and stern voice, he tells her not to thank him, as he didn't save her on purpose. It's strange, as the priest told her the exact same thing when he saved her. With this, she encourages him to enjoy the night and closes the door. The moon is high in the sky, and a lone figure stood outside the lone tavern visitor's door. With a sharp blade around his arm, Hoxa enters the room and finds Van sleeping on the bed. Silently and swiftly, he thrusts the weapon towards his target's head. However, the sharp still is caught with a bare hand. The Tez executive is flustered, but his enemy wastes no time and sends him back with a punch. Wide awake and focused, the bearer of ruin says he's been waiting for the priest to come. In the dark room, Hoxa calls someone and reports that Merkel's killer was in his tavern. Another member of the group is glad, and tells him to summon him there using the formation. Since doing so might alert and prompt the enemy to run, the innkeeper decides to trap him first. Accepting the proposal, the ally says he'll be waiting. Now, Van criticizes him for nurturing children like a guardian, but killing people behind the scenes. Not caring for his excuses, he demands to know where Kezar was right that instant. Hoxa is surprised, not expecting him to already know so much about Teze. Whatever the case, he can't just reveal their information to an enemy. Unwrapping his arms, Van gets ready to fight, and is eager to see how loyal he'll be after his limbs are taken on by one. He's given one last chance to turn back and pretend that nothing happened, but the mercenary has already tried to kill him once. Since there doesn't seem to be a way out of it, Hoxa takes a piece of paper out from his pocket. The formation activates and the room is covered in bright and live inscriptions. Caught off guard, Van fails to react fast enough and gets transported into a different location. With a quick look, it was obvious that he was in a cake, where the only way out was up. The enemy evidently wants him trapped. He's heard of formations from Partel before. Runecraft powers are inscribed into letters or images, and can be activated by pouring mana in. With that said, the enemy that brought him there was nowhere to be found. Suddenly, a sharp swing cut across his face without any warning. Van is surprised, not expecting a blade of mana to attack him. A flurry of swipes come at him, and he's forced to back away from an invisible enemy. Gaining a bit of distance, he plants his feet to charge up, and dashed in to punch in the direction the attacks were coming from. He misses and ends up breaking the wall, still unable to figure out why the presence vanished again. Hoxa appears behind him, warning the sorcerer against turning his back in a battlefield. The sharp mana gauntlet is swung right at his head. Fortunately, Van's quick reflexes allow him to dodge with just a small wound. That said, it was a bad situation, and he'd be done for if it continues. He puts a large distance between them to recuperate. Sensing the enemy with his bare eyes was not an option, and even sound was unreliable. The runecraft of a top executive is formidable indeed. Meanwhile, Hoxa watched from above the cave, setting his sights on his target before attacking. Now armed with 2 mana gauntlets, he casts his concealing rune and erases his presence. He launched himself and drove his weapon into the ground, but Van ran away in time. In a narrow and dark cave, dodging attacks is already a challenge in itself. However, locating his missing enemy only made things even harder. That said, he seems to be doing well enough with all the dodging. The sorcerer found an opening, and it was finally time to counterattack. He dashed forward with overwhelming speed. Hoxa stood in his place, frozen and shocked that his enemy was speeding toward him with precision. It's impossible, but Van locks his hands around the concealer's throat perfectly, making sure he doesn't get away. Hiding his body won't help, as his mana was still clear as day to the Asura bearer. The second armament is Truth Eye, which allows the host to perceive even the faintest mana. As he was completely caught off guard, Hoxa is driven into the ground face first. The shock wave from the impact shatters the hard floor. In his 40 years as an assassin, he's only the second runecaster to find him with mana alone. Van asks where Kezar is, but the priest just asks what he thought about his kids in the tavern. Gripping his arm in annoyance, the bringer of ruin keeps his promise and tears his limb off, before asking his question again. Surprisingly stubborn, Hoxa shares that he's slaughtered countless people because of Kezar. Van was hurriedly running out of patience, and threatens to rip off another arm if he continues. However, the executive can't die yet, at least not until he ensures the children's safety. He apologizes to his opponent in advance, and unveils another piece of paper. The formation paper glowed with power as it's activated by his mana. With this, Van is sent flying back with the entrance of another Teze mercenary. He backs away, and the newcomer brimmed with power, saying he finally found Merkel's killer. Unfortunately for him, the demon god finally ran out of patience over having his important conversation interrupted by a rude and unwelcomed intruder. Van dashes back, but not before getting cut pretty deep. The masked man notes the black scars on the young man's neck and eyes and concludes that this is the person who killed Merkel. Haxa warns Gitten to be cautious, as Van was able to detect him with magic. Van points at the newly arrived Tezi executive and asks if he will answer his questions. Haxa mentions that Van had asked about Kararak's location. Gitten then starts to remove his mask and says that there is no one who will answer Van's questions. Van sees that talking will get him nowhere and immediately darts forward. Gitten stands calmly with his multi-eyed beast behind him. Van prepares to attack, and the monster clenches his fist to meet him. Their hands meet each other in a powerful impact. Van then notices the assassin back on his feet, running behind him. He swings his weapon and the beast punches downward, but Van leaps out of the way. He then charges his fist and delivers a powerful blow to the monster. The beast raises his arm, but Van says that blocking it is not a good idea. His attack is so powerful that it rips right through the monster's defenses, thus defeating it. He lands nimbly, then dashes forward again with no hesitation. Gitten is impressed that Van was able to achieve such power at such a young age. He then uses his power to open multiple portals from which numerous beasts pour through. He possesses the glyph of summoning, allowing him to store and retrieve anything he needs from another dimension. Van is surprised, but figures it doesn't matter if he just knocks them all down. Haxa, though, takes this chance to slash Van's legs, noting that he let his guard down. The young man is left momentarily defenseless, and the beast comes crashing down on him. They pile all over him, trapping him underneath. Gitten notes that the weight of even one beast would be enough to crush anyone and wonders if he has a body enhancement glyph. Van says he is the one asking the questions and demands answers. The Tezi executive is impressed with the fiery personality and decides he will make Van an assassin of Tezi. First, though, he will turn him into a slave. He activates his other skill, the glyph of taming. It infiltrates the opponent's spiritual world, destroys their ego, and creates a new one that the caster desires. Van is surprised that the executive has two glyphs. Gitten then places his hands on the young man's head and begins the process. He is surprised to find himself, however, in some dark realm and wonders if he is inside the young man's mind. With the glyph of taming, he had created countless beasts. This attempt has never failed. This is why Gitten believed that no matter how powerful a sorcerer was, he would succeed. However, he did not know Van. The boy's mindscape was dark and filled with ferocious-looking creatures. Van had lived with a single-minded determination for revenge. Gitten looks in fear at the monstrosity in front of him. In the deep, dark pit of agony, the boy's mindscape had turned into something unthinkable. The creatures all rush forward, surrounding the terrified executive. They overwhelm him and wrap their tentacles all over him. He screams in fear and wakes up back in the real world, his skill having not worked. Van looks up at him and says he can't allow him to peek into someone's mind like that. Gitten looks on in disbelief as Van gets his hand out and strikes the executive. Gitten screams in pain as his right arm has been completely severed. Blood gushes out as Haxa looks on in shock that the brainwashing failed. Van, meanwhile, lifts all of the beasts up and then tosses them up like balls. He plants his feet deep into the ground and pummels the monsters as they fall back down. His punch creates a powerful blast that rips apart the beasts and flies straight for the ceiling. We see the blue night as the shock wave shakes the building and the ground. Haxa and Gitten are sent flying and crash back down on the ground. Van walks towards them and sees that the executive won't be able to give any answers. He then looks at Haxa, who is crawling desperately away. He grabs him by the hair and gives him one last chance to tell him where Kezer is. Haxa remains silent, and so Van drops him. He then prepares to make him speak, but the kids then run out screaming at Van to stop. They move between them and ask Van not to kill Haxa. The injured assassin asks what they are doing as the kids continue to beg for his life. Van replies that he hasn't killed him yet, though he may die during the interrogation. He then tells them to get lost, or he might kill them, too. Haru then charges in from behind and rams Van, who is unaffected. Often screams with concern as sweat pours down her cheeks. Van asks if the little boy is not going to let go, but Haru holds on, asking him to just leave them alone. Haxa weakly tells the kids to run away, but they refuse to do that. Van, meanwhile, is starting to get annoyed and flings Haru away. He then turns to face the boy and gets into a fighting stance. Hofan's face is now riddled with terror. Van looks at Haru with his cold, ruthless eyes and mercilessly says he will kill the poor boy first. Haru cowers in fear, but just then, Gitten comes to and casts a summon. Van turns his attention. The summoning room links to subspace connected to another dimension, allowing the user to store and release whatever they need. Multiple long tentacles appear and head straight at Van as Gitten looks on in anger. The young man is surprised that the executive is still alive. He braces for the impact, but to his surprise, the tentacles move right past him. All the kids look up and are shocked to see that the attack is actually targeted at them. Some try to run, but all of them, including Haxa, are brutally pierced. Van then plants his feet and bursts forward in a sprint. He appears to be too late, however, as Gitten is already placing himself inside the portal. Van swings but catches nothing but air. He does sense a bit of the residue from the portal in his hands and seems to be thinking about something. Inside the other dimension, Gitten is pleased since he has killed the kids and Haxa. This way, no information about Sir Kesser will leak. He then ruminates on how he actually suffered a lot, not yet realizing that someone has also entered the dimension. He figures he needs to report to Kesser immediately, as we see Van forcing the portal open and coming through. Gitten slowly turns back his skin, shivering with fear. He asks how the young man was able to enter his dimension. Van replies that there was a tiny crevice that was left behind. Just before it closed, he injected it with his magic and forcibly tore it open. His face and aura are purely demonic, as he states that he is sick of dimensions. He places his hand on Getten's head and says that he won't kill him yet since he has many things he needs to ask. He then says he will take him out again in about a month, so he should hold on for a bit. Van's head then morphs into numerous grotesque faces, all screaming in agony. He uses the cursed tool, Gluttony's Pocket. It devours creatures with magic power. A massive tongue grabs Gitten and starts to pull him inside. He screams in terror, begging not to be sent back into Van's hellish mindscape. The pleas fall on deaf ears, and he is pulled inside, where numerous hungry souls grab and claw at him. Van's deformed face then slowly shrinks back to normal. In the other dimension, the bodies of the kids remain on the ground. Van passes through the portal and states that using Gluttony's Pocket consumes a lot of mana. Using it even once is risky. He drops to all fours to catch his breath, then takes a look around. He sees that everyone is dead. He gets up, satisfied that he has secured a hostage who can give him the necessary information. First, though, he will need to recover his magic power. Haxa, though, is still alive and calls to him to wait. He was able to shield Ofan with his body and says she can still be saved. He looks up at Van. Tears are streaming down his face as he pleads with the young man to at least save her. Van looks back and seems to be a bit surprised and unsure of what to do. Two mysterious men are at the grounds where Haxa died and are investigating. They have also found Vergitten's dismembered arm, and have determined that their mysterious enemy is someone crazy enough to go after two Tez executives. Mongo, the bigger one, tells Tomo that he can still smell the faint scent of the attacker. Tomo materializes soldiers with his power and orders them to report to Kesser about what happened, also ordering Mongo to keep tracking their target. Tomo looks at Haxa's corpse and thinks about how pathetic his death is. The next day, Ofen wakes up in a cave. Van is with her, so she asks him what happened to the other kids. He informs her that she was the only one who survived. The girl can't accept it and accuses the man of being mistaken. He insists on going so she can still save them. Van answers coldly that he has already buried the kids' bodies. Ofen screams in denial and asks Van why he saved only her. She shouts at him and tells him that he should have just let her die. Van assures her that he only saved her because he needed her. He recalls asking Haxa why he needed to save Ofan when she would just end up being torn apart by monsters or killed by bandits. Haxa told him that Ofan knows information about Kesser and Teze, intriguing Van. The dying man begs Van to take her alive and deliver her to a village where she can be safe. Van asked what he should do if Ofan turned out to know nothing about Kesser. Haxa replied that he could kill her if that were the case. Van agreed to let her live. Back in the present, Ofan is still in despair, processing her survival guilt. Van grabs her by the neck and lifts her up. He demands that she tell him everything she knows about Kesser. Ofan tells him that Kesser is most likely in the Barkan Kingdom since he was heading to the kingdom on a commission from its king, the last time he met up with Haxa. Van asks what Kesser looks like. Ofan says that his appearance changed every time they saw him and thinks that it must be because of the power. He asks if she knows anything about Kesser's power. Ofan answers that she does not know much except that he is a sorcerer born with 3 types of magic, so rare that there are only a handful who wield these magic in the continent of ActionToon. Van acknowledges that this will prove troublesome. He lets go of Ofan's neck and tells her he needs to tell him the rest of what she knows along the way. He informs her that he made a deal with Haxa for him to escort her to a safe village. They walk together until Ofan sees the light of the exit. The first thing she sees outside are pillars of stone placed under a stone hill. Van informs her that he buried the kids under the stones, since only a grave like this will fend off robbers and monsters. He says he made the grave with care because the children bore no sin. He allows Ophan to say her final goodbyes. Ophan walks to the stone wall and leans on it while tearing up. She remembers when Kezer visited their family and beat up Haska half to death for running away from Teze to look after the children. Haxa begged Kezer for forgiveness and asked that he spare the kids. Kezer told him that his duties had been doubled, and that he would only spare the children if he never ran away again. Once Kezer left, Ophan asked Haxa if he was okay. Haska hugged all his children and promised that he would always protect them. The children could smell Haxa's bad scent from the beatdown, making the family laugh with joy. Haska built the Blue Night Inn shortly after. They spent days living as a family. The memory haunts Ophan that she scrapes the rock wall with enough strength to make her finger bleed. Her eyes are filled with rage while he continues to cry. She asks Van if he is planning to kill Kezer, and he says he will. She demands that he take her with him so that she can grind the man's corpse into dust after he kills him. Van looks at her with contemplation. Later, Mongo and Tomo have already found the grave, and Mongo reports that he has determined from the scent left that their attacker was here only a few hours ago. Tomo is getting excited about meeting their enemies soon, and he is all fired up. There is a mansion. Within it, a man named Surfer walks up its stairs towards a door and knocks on it. He enters the room where Kezer is and says he will report what he knows immediately. Kezer is lying carefree by the window and is shrouded in darkness, which conceals his appearance. He tells Surfer that he already knows of Merkel's failure. Kezer orders him to tell Mongo and Tomo to find the culprit quickly. Surfer asks if he needs to step in personally to solve the problem, but Kezer says there is no reason for him to make a move. Kezer says he will head to the Barkan Kingdom and leave all the trivial matters to him. Surfer replies that he understands. Kezer is welcomed at the Barkan Kingdom Royal Castle. He is guided to the throne room, where the king and his soldiers are there to greet him. The king asks him if he has handled what he has asked of him. Kezer answers that he has eliminated the best sorcerers of the Aran Kingdom, as he has asked. He asks only for the promised payment. The king tells him with a mischievous smile that there is a problem. He explains that he cannot allow for the world to know that the Barkan Kingdom brought in a notorious mercenary course famous for vile works. The entrance door behind Kezer closes. The king claims that he never promised to pay him from the beginning. Kezer laughs out loud at the situation. The king thinks he has gone mad because he is so close to death. Kezer admits that he was too complacent and now realizes that the kingdom is far too broke to pay him to begin with. The king warns him that he can't resist them since 30 of the best Barkan sorcerers have him surrounded in the throne room. A bright green light suddenly shines from the windows. Outside, the sky is shining green. A giant statue, dwarfing the castle, then falls down from the sky. Its bright light annihilates the king and his followers within the castle into dust. Many of them try to flee, but the light is so overwhelming that it obliterates the entire cast into pieces. Kezer is on the grounds where the castle was. His subordinate reports to him that there is nothing left of the castle wherever he goes. Kezer says he intentionally did it that way because doing it any less is not something he calls beautiful. The subordinate offers to take his lord wherever he wants to go. Kisa replies that they want them to walk instead, for he looks at the sky and thinks it is a beautiful day. Ophan tells Van to take her with him, wanting to exact revenge on Kezer. Seeing that she isn't in her right mind, Van refuses to take her, but she insists, claiming that she can't live in peace after what happened and do nothing about it. The mercenary tells her that he has no intention of protecting her, and if she ever gets in his way, he will have to kill her himself. Ophan agrees with his conditions and follows him to the Barkan Kingdom. That night, as the two continue their journey, the presence of enemies appears, watching them closely. Mongo and Tomo, two of Kezer's lackeys, plan to capture Van and offer him to their leader, seeing it as an opportunity to repay the man who took them in. Mongo agrees, swearing to do whatever his brother wants. With this, the two brothers decide to follow them and wait for a chance to annihilate Van. Meanwhile, Ophan and Van pass the same tree thrice and stop in their tracks. They are surely lost in the woods, and Ophan remembers a story about a mysterious forest that her uncle Haxa told her when she was young. The mountain range where the Blue Knight is located was the nest of a demon beast in ancient times, and the entrance to that nest is called the Forest of Moor. Once you enter the forest, you can never escape. Van finds the story absurd, but Ophan insists that it is possible and that countless demon beasts live in the Forest of Moor. Just then, the tree in front of them suddenly transforms into a demon beast and lunges to devour them. Van immediately grabs Ophan and throws her out of the way, saving her from the monster's attack. He then gives the demon a powerful punch, tearing it apart in one go. He then tilts his head toward Ophan, telling the girl that if she wants to survive, she has to hide herself well. Another demon beast appears, and Van starts to fight it too. Throughout the night, he fights more demon beasts, annihilating one after another until the sun comes up. After assuring that all of the monsters are defeated, he calls out to Ophan that she can now come out from her hiding. However, he finds it strange that his mana is being consumed more severely than usual. It feels like the forest is sucking his mana away. He then starts having hallucinations and wonders what the forest really is. Suddenly, he feels a presence behind him and is shocked to see Tomo, who immediately launches an attack. He dodges it at the last minute and tries to overpower the man, but his body is slowly being drained of strength because of the hallucinations. Tomo, the war mercenary of the Teza group, tells his opponent that he shouldn't have wasted his precious mana. Van tries to retaliate but fails. Finding him weak, Tomo underestimates the power his opponent holds and calls him pathetic. Van is obviously at a disadvantage, and as Tomo continues to mock him, his brother Mongo appears behind and launches a surprise attack against Van, sending him flying to the other side of the forest. Meanwhile, Ophan is knocked out cold and tossed unconscious to the side by Mongo. As the brothers talk about how they would have fun with her later, Van is struggling with his low mana. Tomo tells him that they were initially ordered to just observe and track them from the shadows, but he refused to do just that because that order only applies to weak underlings, and they are nothing like that. Mongo agrees with his brother, adding that they need to avenge their comrades who died at Van's hands. The sorcerer leaps for another attack, but his opponent is fast enough to block it. Mongo then counterattacks for his brother and releases a powerful punch toward Van, sending him to the ground once more. Seeing this as an opportunity to rough him up real good, Mongo charges again with incredible speed, unaware that Van is just waiting for his chance to ambush him. The man leaps and is about to attack his opponent, but Tomo appears and delivers a powerful kick, rendering him motionless. Long ago, there was a tribe that spread fear across the continent, a tribe known as the Perfectly Armed Ones, or the Cataphracts. From their ancestors to the present generation, every member of this tribe bears two marks, the mark of armor and the mark of the fist. The mark of armor sorcerers can block any incoming attack, while the mark of the fist sorcerers can crush an enemy's throat with a single blow. Together, they embody the ultimate defense and offense, a shield that can block anything, and a spear that can pierce everything. This deadly balance is how the Cataphracts earned their fearsome title as the Perfectly Armed Ones. Mongo continues his assault on Van until a man clad in armor arrives, ordering him to stop. Tomo, in his armored form, one of Teza's feared executives, looks down at Van with disappointment. He expected more strength from the man who had effortlessly captured two of their comrades. Encased in his special armor that completely shields his body, Tomo exudes an overwhelming aura of power and control. The forest continues to drain Van's mana, and using his destruction fist technique puts him at his limit. Using a weapon that consumes his lifespan is not ideal, but since his mana is depleting, he has no other choice. Tomo starts to get pissed off and orders his brother to finish off the sorcerer and leave only his head, saying that he will present it to Kesser soon. Mongo agrees with his brother, but upon hearing Kesser's name, Van figures out that they are members of the Teza mercenary group. With this, Van starts to unleash himself, telling the brothers that they should spill what they know about Kesser if they want to live. Hearing their lord's name from a weakling like Van is an insult, so Tomo charges toward the sorcerer and is shocked that he summons cursed spirits from the underworld. Since they refuse their last chance, Van can't promise that he will let them live. The cursed spirits turn into a necro dagger, which is a third weapon of the mark of Asura. Tomo stops in his tracks after suddenly feeling the ominous energy coming from Van. The sorcerer then leaps toward him and pierces through his armor, surprising him. Van manages to strike Mongo as well, who shrieks in pain. The brothers are stunned. The man who was on the brink of death just now has regained his power, and they can't even figure out the mark that he is bearing. Tomo immediately acknowledges his fault and apologizes for underestimating his opponent. However, nothing changes, and the brothers are there to destroy him. The two charge toward him, and the three exchange blows, throwing strikes and punches with all their might. The brothers are starting to get overwhelmed by Van's attacks. The sorcerer continues his offense, confusing the brothers with his speed and strategy. Eventually, Tomo manages to catch him and tells his brother to crush their enemy. However, he is surprised to see that his brother's mana is being drained and he is now motionless on the ground. Just then, from Tomo's wound, cursed spirits appear, making him immobile. Van reveals that his weapon, the necro dagger, is a cursed blade that feeds on mana, and anyone who is cut by it will have those cursed spirits latched onto them, devouring their mana. The spirits will finish their mana until they are full. Until then, they will not stop. Tomo lets out a screeching scream of pain, pleading with the cursed spirits to stop draining his mana. He starts disintegrating, being slowly consumed by the spirit and surrendering to a slow, agonizing death. As the morning comes, all that's left of Tomo is his true form. He has been reinforcing himself with mana all along. Tomo lashes out, screaming at Van to give them back the artificial mana that Kezar has granted them. Hearing something interesting, Van demands that they tell him more about the artificial mana, saying that they can't fight him anymore anyway. This brings back Tomo to the past when he and his brother were still in the Cataphract tribe. That day, the chief had a trade with the Teze mercenary leader Kezor, who noticed the two frail boys tied to a tree. The chief told him that the boys didn't have the ability to store mana and were a disgrace to the tribe. They had lasted 5 years, but soon they would die, so he shouldn't bother himself with them. However, Kezor volunteered to take them. 10 years later, the two brothers had transformed into feared sorcerers. Kezor asked what they sought in slaughtering so many humans. Tomo admitted that when he saw the weak and the helpless, he was reminded of what he and his brother were. If they hadn't met their lord, they would have lived their entire lives like filth, and the thought filled them with disgust and rage that they had to kill them right before their eyes. Kezar told them that their killings were shallow and stemmed from self-hatred. He then told them that they needed to restrain themselves, and that kind of self-destruction was far from beautiful. In the present, the brothers charge at Van once more, their pride blinding them to their defeat. But their defiance meets its end as Van strikes with absolute precision, silencing them both and bringing the battle to a close, as he leaves their dead bodies behind.